So we would like now to invite the section editors, the two outgoing, Marcel Durieux, Tony Jin, up here, if you don't mind, and Ken Johnson, the sitting editor, section editor. Markus Hollmann couldn't make it, and so Ken will represent the section of anesthetic pharmacology and give us your parting thoughts on many years. And I think, well, thank you for your service as editors for anesthetic pharmacology.
For the sake of time, I'm going to propose that we keep this very short. If that's okay with you guys. We thought we'd go open mic, and if anybody has any questions or thoughts or ideas you wanted to pass on to us. I'll just briefly make a few comments. First, I would like to thank my immediate mentors to my left, who over the last year I've periodically curbsided. I think I even called Tony up in Hong Kong a few times and went, what have I got myself into? And he was very kind. And so I appreciate that mentorship, so thank you. Another thought is that I have learned so much from the outgoing EIC. He hasn't really talk to me directly about it, but all the decision letters that we make and all the tough situations we get into, perhaps with a conflicting decision, or watching how he interacts with people in a very professional way has been a education for me. So, Steve, thank you for all that mentoring from afar. Appreciate it. Another thought is that I just wanted to give you what my track record's like so far. I've had the opportunity to review numerous manuscripts, and I think I'm a whopping 15%. And that's just where the state of the art is right now in terms of manuscripts that come in, and I have to make a decision on them, and based on input from reviewers. I'm feeling a little bit behind the rest of the journal, which has a bit of a higher acceptance rate. So the challenge is there. My final thought that I would just like to throw out is, as the new guy, is I'm very, very grateful for all the reviewers and editors who have contributed to editing papers that I am asked to review. Your time and effort on this front is immeasurable, and so I'm very grateful for that. So with that, I think I'll let our parting section editors take the remainder of the time and perhaps tell us a story or an adventure while you're with your time in the saddle. So thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I suppose I've had a difficult but enjoyable time as a section editor. I want to apologize in advance to the authors that submitted papers in the year that I had a 2% acceptance rate. I did get up to 15% finally when I left, but I think that really reflects our specialty. We are one of the fundamental sort of pillars of anesthetic pharmacology, of anesthesia as a specialty. And an anecdote, when I was speaking to Sam, she's the administrative manager who looks after ISAP. They also look after SOAP, Society of Sleep Medicine. And I was commenting that, Society of Sleep Medicine has a larger audience or a large number of delegates than we have. But she said, and she's only been with us for a year, she said the Society of Sleep Medicine leadership reviewed our attendance list and said, wow, they're the heavy hitters. And I think we are, to some extent, have a high intellectual content, and we sort of expect more from our papers and our reviews. But at the same time, we have to make them understandable. And one of the interesting things I think as section editor was that we do want rigorous reviews, we do want rigorous papers, but sometimes I've accepted a paper which isn't the best, but we want it in our journal. For example, we've managed by going out to source, people who are at the head of their field, we managed to source the remimazolam papers to anesthesia and analgesia. But one of them was such a terrible paper. It was one of the first clinical studies comparing remimazolam and midazolam. Just by itself, a multi-center study for endoscopy. But they gave everyone essentially rescue with midazolam if they needed it. And if you're trying to do an endoscopy only on sedation, there's a high number of rescues. And of course, when you look at the post-operative recovery, when more than half your patients have a rescue with midazolam, it's pretty hard to make some comparison of the outcome of remimazolam with midazolam. But I wanted it in the journal because we were very rigorous in what we required the authors to disclose. They had to essentially disclose their whole data. And that could have gone to another journal, and a lot of that information could have been glossed over. But I think what I found that's valuable is that we make our authors essentially disclose almost all their raw data. And nowadays with online supplements, it's much easier to have all your raw data for other people to analyze. Of course, the non-men people always argue amongst themselves how to model things, but if you have the raw data there, then anyone can go afterwards and look at it. Similarly, for example, Sugamidex. People often say, Sugamidex, the reversal of Sugamidex is so quick, a couple of minutes. But if you look at some of those papers, the range goes out to 10, 12, 14 minutes because there's a few people who are out there. And again, if you supply the raw data, then from all the studies, then people can go look at it later and interpret for us what are important. The outliers are very important for us in our clinical practice. So I found it, I say, a very valuable, very interesting process. I hope the people have submitted the best papers to us. I'm sure in some ways the history of Steve being editor-in-chief of the journal has meant that a lot of pharmacology papers have come to us. And I say, I thank you for all your patience. We never quite stuck to the turnaround time with our pharmacology papers. As you know, they're quite complex. I appreciate all the authors and reviewers' patience in that. And I say, I hope that you found my time with the journal not too stressful and onerous, and I hope I haven't offended too many people. Thank you.
All right, I'll keep this very brief, if only because I didn't actually prepare anything to say. So, but I do want to thank Steve, like everyone else has, for all the mentorship during this time. There is an amazing step up going from an editor or reviewer to section editor. It seems like that little word shouldn't make that much difference. But the reality is that in addition to just the science, which is the great fun of it, suddenly there's all this process stuff that comes on top of it. I would have a paper, review it, send it back, and then 2 days later there would be an email from Frank Stechter saying, look, statistics are all wrong, please contact authors, tell them to completely redo the whole paper, and then, okay, all right, here we go. And then the answers wouldn't reply, or the typical 3 reviewers out, 2 come back right away, 1 waits 4 weeks and then says, I cannot do it. And then you have to find someone else. It's a very specialized topic. And it's all those kind of things that made the job really interesting, I think, to the extent that Marcus Holman is so overwhelmed that he couldn't even make it here today. But it has been a really interesting road. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope it has been useful for the society. I think pharmacology really was difficult to me to handle, and I think a lot of what we decided in the end with papers comes down to what Steve was already saying at the beginning. Is this paper part of a road? Is this going to go somewhere or not? We got lots of papers that were not going to go anywhere at all, and there were other papers that maybe technically were not perfect, but that clearly were pointing into a new direction, and I hope we have typically made the right decision in selecting the ones and rejecting the other. So thank you very much.
Are there any questions on the publishing process and the reviewing process, experiences that you would like to share, and where you have some thoughts on how how you experienced if you were a reviewer and you couldn't really grab a decision, or is there any concern from the room? From the floor? No? Because yesterday we were already discussing a little bit on the experience that if you are a reviewer, you feel tempted to have some comments, and some, even on good papers, you will have some comments. And I found if you send in a paper as an author to ANA, you get 5 reviews, which is quite tough sometimes to answer that. And I wonder whether this is just a sign of a consequence of the frauds that have been detected, or is it a sign of distrust, and shouldn't we rethink it a little bit?
Steve.
But
the medical literature, we're starting to realize how flawed, how deeply flawed it is. And can you hear me in the front? We need a microphone. So we're starting to realize that the medical literature is potentially fairly deeply flawed. And the studies that have looked at the fact that the literature is flawed are not looking at this onslaught of open access garbage that we all get invited almost weekly to be editors-in-chief of. And you all get the same invitations that I do, or please submit my next paper to Functional Foods, as though this is something I know something about. The papers the journals that they look at are the top journals in disciplines, particularly internal medicine, and they're demonstrating a huge problem with reproducibility and accuracy in those papers. So, as I said, when you publish something, the idea is to have it last forever, and sometimes there are multiple rounds of reviews, and sometimes there are multiple reviewers, but we're trying to get it right because we only really have one shot at doing that before it's out there in the literature. And my hope, despite torturing authors with complex reviews and multiple reviews and stuff, is that what we've done, what the editors have done, is finally get papers that will stand the test of time. And we won't know. But my hope is that, compared to some of the issues that we had years ago with the journal, that the papers that you folks have handled with so much effort and work will stand the test of time.
So I have felt your pain many times myself. I think I have typically used a smaller number of reviewers on the papers. There are 2 things that I think were important. The first thing is a lot of papers, particularly in basic science, but also in clinical science, have gotten so complicated that you need 3 reviewers in order to catch each aspect of the paper, the statistics, the specific technique that was being used, and maybe the context in which the paper belongs. The second thing that I think Steve has really encouraged, and that I would encourage anyone else to do, is a lot more direct communication with the authors. Now, the review process as it's laid out is very formal, which is good to some degree, but very often just email directly to the author saying, look, this is a problem, can we talk about this? Or phone calls with the authors have been incredibly helpful in sorting some of these things out and preventing additional rounds of review.
Okay, also due to the fact that the time schedule has been extended a little bit, we will keep this part a little short and give some extra space for the Lifetime Achievement Award winner. So I would like to thank again our section editors. We are really fortunate that we have such impact. And then I would like to leave the word to Talmage to introduce our last speaker.